It's great to be at Westside, and whether you are a guest today or whether you're a regular part of our family here, let me get my mic straight this morning. Whether you're a guest or whether you're a part of our family, welcome. We are really glad that you joined us today as we come together. A couple of things before I get into my message this morning. First of all, we have two couples celebrating anniversaries this week that are of note. Jack and Joanne Kenningham will be celebrating their 56th wedding anniversary on Thursday. And Jack and Joanne, we want you to know how much we appreciate you. And Kent and Norma Lou Roman will be celebrating their 65th wedding anniversary on Wednesday. Kent and Norma Lou, we appreciate you so much. Both of these couples are an outstanding example to all of us who are married, and we are grateful for them and all of our couples who have been married for so very many years. I want to tell you that tonight Westside is going to be the sweetest church in town because there is a progressive dinner being planned for Harding students among the Searcy area congregations. And Westside is in charge of providing the desserts tonight. So everybody's going to be coming here as the last stop along the way of that progressive dinner tonight. And I appreciate the ladies that have been in charge of preparing this, and those who are providing food for it. And if you have a possibility, if you have a chance to be there just to welcome students and let them know how glad you are that they're here, and interact with them just a little bit. And let me tell all of you who are students how much I'm enjoying getting to know you. I was in the college class last Sunday and had the opportunity to meet some of you then. I'll be over in the annex this morning when they're having coffee and enjoying that. And I'm also in chapel, at least on Tuesdays. I try to come over to chapel, at least the 9 o'clock chapel. So if you're in 9 o'clock chapel, come back around where the soundboard is. You'll normally find me wandering around back there somewhere. I might even take you to Starbucks. Who knows? So just come on over and say hello to me if you're in 9 o'clock chapel on Tuesday mornings. So always look forward to getting involved and to meet students. It's a great, great pleasure for me. Well, this morning I want to talk to you about finding faith in a fallen world. And I want to begin by telling you about the gentleman that's in this picture. His name is Ted Turner. Now, you may be familiar with Ted Turner. If you're not, let me tell you just a little bit about him. He is the founder of CNN. Not only CNN, but also the superstation WTBS out of Atlanta, TNT, Turner Network Television, Turner Classic Movies. You get the idea. He is a media magnet. Not only that, but today he is one of the largest landowners in the United States. He owns acres and acres of land in the state of Montana. And Forbes magazine says that his net worth is more than $2.2 billion with a B dollars. That's a lot of money. Let me tell you something else about Ted Turner. I read an article a few years ago now in the New York Times that talked about how Turner, who is very anti-religious, not just passively, but even anti-religious, how at one time in his life, Ted Turner had a very strong faith in God. And he even considered becoming a minister. The New York Times reporter asked him what happened to his faith. And he said, well, I was constantly told that God is all-powerful and that God is all-loving. And then my sister became ill with a serious crippling, painful illness and died. And I could never reconcile how an all-powerful, all-loving God could allow someone so innocent to suffer. Have you ever wondered that? Maybe you know someone who is going through a struggle in their faith today who's wondering that very same thing. Maybe you're going through a time of doubt and struggle in your life, and you're wondering, why does God allow certain things to happen? Maybe you're one of that growing number of people in our culture today who don't really possess any faith in God and who just really kind of think that church is a waste of time. According to a 2014 Pew Research study, 34% of millennials say that they are either atheists or have no religious affiliation of any type. They're called the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, the nuns, because they don't believe anything. 34%. Well, this morning I want us to seek some answers. Is it possible for us to find faith in a fallen world? And I want us to go to the Old Testament, to a book that is in about the middle part of the Old Testament. It's called the book of Job. Now, Job is classified as one of the books of poetry. You'll find that book immediately before the book of Psalms in your Old Testament. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, those are the books that are called poetry. But it's interesting because I believe the man Job lived a long time before the events that are recorded for the most part in Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. I believe that Job probably was more or less a contemporary of Abraham or one of the patriarchs. You say, well, why do you believe that? Well, there's no mention in the book of Job of the nation of Israel or of the law of Moses. And we even find Job acting as sort of a family patriarch and a family priest. So there's some evidence within this book that the events that are pictured in the book of Job happened a long time ago, very early on in terms of Bible history. But what do we know about this man Job? Let me introduce him to you very briefly. First of all, let me tell you something about this man's character. Well, first of all, where did he live? I always thought this was interesting. It says that he lived in a country called Uz, not Oz as in Wizard of, but Uz. Now we have no idea where Uz was, except for the Bible says he was a man of the east, so probably Transjordan, which means east of the Jordan. Could have been as far north as Syria or as far south as modern-day Iran or Iraq. We just don't know exactly where Uz was. I worked all week on that one. But here's the thing about it. Regardless of the time Job lived or where Uz was, the message of the book of Job is extremely important for people who are struggling to find faith in a fallen world. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Job. First of all, his character. Right here in Job 1, verse 1, we find that this man from Uz named Job was blameless, righteous. He feared God and turned his back on evil. He was a man of good character. Now, secondly, chapter 1, verse 2 tells us something about his content. His content, his wealth. Look at this. This man had 7,000 sheep. That's a lot of wool. He had 3,000 camels. That's a lot of humps. He had 500 yoke of oxen and 500 female donkeys. and many servants. In other words, this man was sort of like the Ted Turner of his day. He was wealthy. He was well-to-do financially. Let me tell you something about his children. Verse 2 again. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters. And these children appear to have been very close to one another. There doesn't seem to be a lot of any dysfunction in Job's family because his children came together regularly when each one had their day. Now, we don't know what that day was. It may have been their birthday. We just don't know. But when each one had their day, all of the children would gather together for a time of celebration and feasting. Now, so this is Job's character, his content, his children. But what about his commendation? Well, if you'll look at Job chapter 1, beginning with verse 6, down through verse 8, you're going to find a scene that is very unique in the Bible. For you're going to find there the description of the angels coming before God at a certain occasion. And when the angels came before God, guess who else showed up for the party? Satan. Satan. Now the word Satan means adversary. The adversary showed up. And God said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan said, "From roaming back and forth upon the earth." And by the way, Peter says in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, that Satan does the same thing today. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Well, when Satan says, "I've been going back and forth on the earth," God says, "Have you considered my servant Job? I don't have anyone like him. He is blameless. He is upright. He is a man of outstanding character." Now, Satan cannot let that go. Satan says to God, "Well, the reason Job is that way is because he lives in a bubble. He lives in a bubble. You've built a fence around him. You've given him all of these blessings. But if you stripped all those blessings away from Job, he'd spit in your face, God. He'd curse you." Now, folks, sometimes we wonder, why did God let things happen? God could not let that challenge from Satan go unanswered. God couldn't just sit there and not respond to that. And so God allowed Satan to tempt and test Job. We're going to find out this happens twice. Once in chapter 1, once in chapter 2. And in chapter 1, he says, "Now you can do this, but you are not allowed to touch him physically." That's in chapter 1. We'll get to chapter 2 in a minute. Now, what is Job's response when he is tested? When he encounters the struggles that we're getting ready to see, what was Job's response? It can be summed up in just one phrase that I want you to mark in your Bible. Over in Job 13, verse 15, write it down or mark it in your Bible, bookmark it on your cell phone, whatever it may be. Job 13, verse 15, here it is. What was Job's response to the testing that he received? "Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Though he slay me, yet I will hope or trust in him." Now, in what situations was Job's faith tested? I want you to notice 3 ways Job's faith endured. Number 1, I want us to look at faith in times of suffering. Faith in times of suffering, okay? Here in Job chapter 1, we find that Job is sitting around one day, and all of a sudden some servants come. And when the servants arrive, they say, "Job, all of your livestock has been destroyed. It's all gone. It's been stolen or it's been destroyed." Those 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys. It's all gone. Have you ever gotten up on a particular morning and been going about your daily routine, and all of a sudden something happens that changes your world in an instant? I mean, just like that. For a number of years prior to coming to Westside, some years ago, I served as a chaplain, a volunteer chaplain for the Arkansas State Police. I still have my badge, still have my chaplain's badge. But one of my responsibilities as a chaplain with the state police was to accompany state troopers in notifying next of kin when there had been a traffic fatality. That's a tough job. But I've been all over North Arkansas with state troopers to make death notifications regarding traffic fatalities. And I have seen people respond in all different ways when they have received the word just out of the blue that a loved one has been killed. I remember one night having to make a notification to a man up near Batesville. And that man, we never got him out of bed. It was the middle of the night. Turned out he was as drunk as he could be. And we had to tell him in his drunken stupor that his 18-year-old son had been following in his daddy's pattern of drinking and walking down the highway and stumbled out in front of an 18-wheeler. And his dad didn't even register with him. I've seen people respond stoically, and then I've seen people fall to the floor in grief. Well, here Job was, minding his own business, going about his life. Everything seemed to be normal, when all of a sudden, a servant comes and says, Job, you're bankrupt. You've lost everything you own. All of your stock is gone, literally. And no sooner had that servant left than another servant rushes in, and he says, Job, all of your children were at their brother's house celebrating when suddenly a furious wind erupted from the wilderness and blew down the corners of the house, and it collapsed. And Job, all of your kids are dead. They're all gone. What would you do? Look at Job 1, verse 20 and verse 21. Then Job tore his robes, a sign of grief. Don't deny grief. Grief has a place in your emotional well-being. Job shaved his head, but then notice what he did. He fell to the ground and he worshiped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord is given, and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I think verse 22 is particularly significant. In all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. So often today, when bad things happen in life, people want to blame. Who's to blame? It's the other driver's fault. Let's sue them. Who's to blame? It's the doctor's fault. Let's file malpractice. Who's to blame? It's the teacher's fault. Who's to blame? God is to blame. And I'll shake my fist at God. A lot of people do that. And their lives are miserable. Well, if that's not enough, go to chapter 2. Satan comes back before God, and God tells Satan, After all of this, Job has maintained his integrity. I love that word. After all of this, Job has maintained his integrity. Satan says, well, skin for skin. You put limitations on me. Let me afflict his body. Let me touch him, God, and then he'll curse you and deny you. So God says, all right. God had tremendous confidence in Job. You know, over in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12, the Bible talks about, there's that passage that says, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able to bear. God knows your limits. God knows what you're capable of. God knew what Job was capable of. And so God says, okay, you may touch his life, but you must spare it. You cannot take his life. And so Satan reaches out and afflicts Job with a debilitating illness, a disease that caused boils, sores, ulcers to break out from the top of his head all the way down to the bottom of his feet. Have you ever had a boil? Had one boil one time when I was in high school. It was on my knee. And I remember how painful that was. Job had them all over him. It was so bad that he would go sit in the ashes and take broken pieces of pottery to scrape the infection that was oozing from those sores on his body. Not a pretty picture. And Job's wife came up to him and said, Job, in this misery, why don't you just curse God and die? Now, how's that for support from your wife? Job, won't you just curse God and die? Job maintained his integrity. He said, shall we accept good times from God and not accept adversity? You and I live in a fallen world. How else can you explain mass shootings in places like El Paso or Dayton? Or the massacre of school children in Sandy Hook or other places that have occurred in recent years? How do you explain man's inhumanity to man? We live in a fallen world. Paul says in Ephesians 2:2 that we live in a world that is ruled by the prince of the power of the air, the spiritual forces of wickedness that now works in the sons of disobedience. And later in Ephesians 6, verse 12, he says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against angels and principalities, against the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly places. There is a spiritual battle going on behind the scenes that we may not recognize in totality, but it is being played out in the lives of men and women every single day. We live in a fallen world. Now, not only in times of suffering, but what about faith in times of scorn? Over in Job 19, verses 14 and 15, Job said, even my family has failed me. Even my family has failed me, and my most intimate friends have forsaken me. Even the servants of my house and my maids treat me as a stranger and look upon me as a foreigner. Here in the midst of all of his suffering, Job had 3 friends who came to talk to him. Now, Job was so disfigured when they first arrived, they didn't even recognize Job. I mean, they didn't even recognize him. He was so disfigured. But these 3 friends show up. Their names are Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Don't worry, it's not on the test. You can go to heaven without knowing their names. But you need to know it from the Bible Bowl, maybe. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. with friends like these who needs enemies. Because they show up and they think they've got to convict Job. They think it is their God-given job to straighten Job out because they reason that if Job is suffering so much, it must be because he has done something wrong. When you look at Job chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, Eliphaz says to Job, he says, Job, why are you suffering if you have done nothing wrong? He said, I've never seen the innocent go, I've never seen the guilty go unpunished. I've never seen someone plow iniquity or sow trouble and it not be harvested. You are actually receiving punishment for something you've done wrong. Now what is it, Job? And Job is saying, I haven't done anything. Have you ever been falsely accused of something? Well, Job was being accused by his friends of all people. And then there was his wife. Job, why don't you curse God and just die? Just be over with. Job was facing ridicule and scorn. Now, sometimes you're going to face ridicule and scorn in your life. It may be when someone you know wants you to do something that you don't want to participate in. It may be when someone makes fun of your faith. Just remember, Jesus was scorned by some of those who were closest to him. Judas, one of Jesus' hand-picked apostles, betrayed him and delivered him up to the Pharisees to be crucified. Peter, the one to whom Jesus had said, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Peter, who said, Lord, I'll never deny you. I'll die with you, Jesus. And then he turns right around and 3 times he denies Jesus, even cursing and swearing he doesn't know him. Paul, writing in 2 Timothy 4, verse 10, says, Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. There are going to be people in your life, some of whom are going to be very close to you, who at some point in your life are going to turn their backs on you. You can just mark that down. Can you maintain your faith and your integrity in times of scorn? Job did. And then third, what about faith in times of searching? Now don't think for a moment that Job didn't have questions. In Job 23, verses 3 through 5, Job says, Oh, that I might find him and come before his seat, that I might plead my case before him, and that my mouth might be filled with arguments. Then I would hear the words that he has to say and perceive what he has said to me. Job was saying, God, I wish I knew where I could find you, because I'd really like to ask you some questions. I'd really like to just sit down with you, God, because I don't understand some things. I really need to ask some questions of you. Remember, Job had never read the book of Job. Okay? Job was just, he was a man like you and I are men and women. Job was human. He had never read the book of Job. Job didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. And yet, he maintains his integrity and his faith before God. Have you ever asked the question, why? Why? As a preacher, for a number of years now, I guess that's one of those questions that I've had from people so many times. People will ask me sometimes when someone is confronted with an illness, or maybe there's a death, or maybe there's just the loss of a job, or the loss of a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or the breakup of a marriage, or whatever it may be. Sometimes people come to the preacher and they'll say, why? Why? And I used to think that I had to out some kind of answer. But I don't do that anymore. Sometimes I just shake my head and I say, I don't know. I don't have all those answers. But look at what God tells Job. Over in Job 38, verse 4, God responds to all of Job's questions. And here's what God says. He says, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I stretched the plumb line out for creation? Job, where were you when I flung the stars into the universe? Where were you, Job, when I created everything? Do you know what God was saying? Job, my ways are so much higher than your ways, and my thoughts are so much higher than your thoughts. If I were even to try to explain, if you were to try to grasp my wisdom and my knowledge, it would be like trying to plug a little transistor radio into a 220 outlet. It would completely blow your mind. You couldn't handle it. One of my best friends was stricken with non-Hodgkin's leukemia. When he was so sick, I went to see him. He lived in near Jackson, Mississippi, and I drove down there one day. He and I had gone to Harding together. We lived next door to each other in Keller, third floor, 3A of Keller. And we were in the same social club. He was best man at my wedding. I was in his wedding. And so I went to see him. And I said, how you doing, Raj? And he said, well, I've been asking why. Why? Here I am, the father of 2 small children. Why do I have cancer, lymphoma? Why? And he said, then it dawned on me, my question is not to ask why. My task is to trust in God and to ask, how can this make me a better person? How can this make me better? Isn't that what we all need? So let me ask you this morning as I wrap it up. And here's where we get to the question I always ask myself as I'm preparing my messages. So what? So what? How does this affect you as you leave this church building and go out into the world? So what? If you're struggling with your faith today, if you're dealing with a fallen world, remember the message of Job. In all of this, Job maintained his integrity and did not blame God. Yea, though you slay me, I will hope in you. If your hope is not in God, you have no hope. There is no one else in which hope can be found. And this morning, if you need God in your life, if you need Him in your family, if you need Him to lead you and guide you, maybe you're going through a tough time, maybe you just have come to a point in life where you realize your sin and you need to confess your faith in Christ and put Him on in baptism. We'd love to help you. We love you. We'll pray with you, for you, and serve you in any way we can while together we stand.